Good evening, and thank you for joining the City of Riverside Housing and Public Safety Virtual Workshop number 2. This meeting will formally begin momentarily. Thank you to those who joined us during the first meeting on January 7th. This is a continuation of that meeting. My name is J.C. Lacey. I'm with Ariano Associates, and we're running some of the virtual behind the scenes activities here to make this Zoom meeting possible today. We also have ASL interpretation on this meeting. Those interpreters will be switching off in minutes. You do have the ability to pin them in your camera view. And so if you click the 3 dots on their photo, you'll be able to pin the interpreters. We'll go through those steps again as people continue to fill into the room here. We do have Spanish interpretation as well. It is available for this meeting, as well as phone only, text to chat. In case you lose a connection, that is available to you as well. And again, this meeting is being recorded just like the first meeting. It's all available on the project website. We'll go into that. We do have a lot to cover today. We want to allow time for some polls. One of the main purposes of doing these meetings is to get feedback and community input. So that's what the polling is about. We do encourage you to please participate in those. They're short and to the point. So your feedback is very valuable there. And we are expected to go through about 7:30. We have a hard stop at 8. That should be the day. So we do encourage you on the chat to enter your questions as you think of them, because we can group them and answer them in that way. So with that, I will officially hand it over to the city to formally welcome you to this meeting.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see me and hear me. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us to learn more about the Housing and Public Safety Updates and Environmental Justice Policies Project, or the UPDATE for short. My name is Matthew Taylor with the Community and Economic Development Department of the City of Riverside, and I am acting as the city's project manager. We'll also introduce some key members of our team in just a moment. Tonight's meeting is the second in a series of public workshops intended to share our progress on this important project and to gain your input and feedback as we plan for the future to meet the city's obligations related to housing, public safety, and environmental justice. Our first virtual workshop was held on January 7th, and I will recap some of what we presented in that workshop in a few moments. We also plan to have an additional public workshop in the later part of February for another opportunity for you to provide input, and we'll give you more information about that later on. During this meeting, we will provide background on the update, including what we are required to accomplish, the timeframe in which we need to achieve it. And then we will give an update of the work we have done so far to identify some potential opportunity locations to help meet the city's housing needs, including a demonstration of some options for what that could look like. We'll also take a look at the environmental justice and public safety components of the update and a brief overview of the environmental review process. After the presentation, we will also provide an opportunity for open discussion during the latter part of tonight's workshop, where you can ask questions and provide comments in an open forum. We'll hope you will stay around and join us for that portion of tonight's meeting. Next slide, please. Actually, can I have slide 3, please? Next, yeah, there we go. Okay. Before we begin, JC mentioned this briefly, but there's some housekeeping items that we want to touch on one more time for those who are still joining us. If you would like to listen to a Spanish language interpretation of this workshop, follow the instructions on the slide to access the Spanish audio interpretation. Or if you're participating by phone, you can dial 571-317-3122 to access the Spanish audio interpretation by phone. If you require American Sign Language interpretation, we have 2 ASL interpreters available. Please let us know in the chat if you require interpretation so that we can enable you to pin their video feed to your screen so that you can see them throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay. I'm not seeing the slides. There we go. Thank you. All right. Moving on. Okay. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and the video and presentation materials will be posted to the project website after the meeting, just like they were for the first meeting on the 7th. You can also take the survey or share it with your friends and neighbors by visiting the project website at riversideca.gov/housing update. That survey will be available until tomorrow morning, when we will be updating it with new questions. Finally, this meeting is the second in a series of workshops on this project, and our next workshop is going to be scheduled for late February. We'll be announcing the date for the next meeting in the next week or so, and we hope to see you there. Next slide, please. Throughout the meeting, we'll pause to ask your opinion on several important questions through a polling feature that we'll demonstrate for you in a moment and give you an opportunity to test. A new window will pop up when polls are launched for you to select and submit your answers. If you prefer not to answer poll questions, you can skip them if you like. But we do value your participation and hope you will answer the poll questions. Next slide, please. At certain points in the meeting, we'll also pause for questions and answers on the topics that we've presented. This portion of the Q&A will be conducted by the Zoom chat function only, but we will also take verbal questions and comments later in the meeting. More on that in just a moment. To submit a question through the chat for the Q&A, please make sure you select everyone in the chat drop-down menu to ensure that we see your submission. Next slide, please. After the presentation is concluded, we'll also be hosting an open discussion section, as I mentioned, where you can ask us questions or provide comments directly. If you would like to speak, please use the raised hand button in the meeting controls, which, depending on the version of Zoom that you're running, will either appear under participants or under reactions. Or if you are joining the meeting by phone, dial 9 if you would like to be called on to speak during that portion of the meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, so our agenda tonight has 4 main pieces. First, we'll provide some background on the project purpose and timeline, provide a brief recap of the previous workshop on January 7th, and reintroduce the project team for those who have not met them yet. Next, we'll give a brief summary of the legal and regulatory reasons for the housing element update, the regional housing needs assessment, and what those requirements mean for Riverside. After that, we'll demonstrate a few of the scenarios that we've developed that show how some of the housing opportunity sites we previously identified can help us meet our housing goals. Then we'll move on to provide some background on the public safety element update and the environmental justice policies components of the project, as well as some high-level information on the environmental review process required by the California Environmental Quality Act. At the end of the presentation, before we begin the open discussion portion of the workshop, we will also be sharing some additional opportunities and means by which you can provide input and stay connected with the project as we move forward. Next slide, please. And just as a brief reminder, or if you would like to review the materials from the previous workshop, including a story map showing how we identified our housing opportunity sites, you can go to the links shown on the screen here or just visit riversideca.gov/housing update. You can also contact me directly by email if you have questions, comments, or concerns, or just would like to talk about the housing element update project or any other piece of what we're sharing with you. Again, we're planning another workshop in late February, so be sure to stay tuned for updated meeting information for that. Next slide, please. Okay. So first things first, what is this project and why are we doing it? So to keep it very brief, every city and county in California must maintain a general plan made up of several key elements or topics. One of those is called the housing element, and its purpose is to make sure that cities are planning adequately for the supply of housing available to everyone. Part of the housing element includes identifying sites within the city where a variety of housing could be built, and if not enough adequate sites exist, changing our plans to provide more places where that can happen. Other laws require us to update the public safety element of our general plan and to develop environmental justice policies at the same time that the housing element is updated. We've combined all three updates in this project. In terms of the project timeline, which you see here, we are about halfway through the initial public engagement phase, which includes this series of virtual workshops. Our goal is to gather as much feedback as possible during this phase so that we can arrive at a preferred plan by the end of February 2021, which is very critical to make sure that we have enough time to complete the required California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, environmental review over the summer. At the same time, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, will be reviewing our draft housing element update to ensure that it meets their expectations. We need their sign-off before we can bring the final updates to the housing element, public safety element, and environmental justice policies to the Planning Commission and the City Council for final approval and adoption. Our deadline for this project is October 15th, 2021. So as you can understand, this is an aggressive timeline, and we need as much of your feedback as we can get in order to stay on track. Next slide, please. As I mentioned briefly earlier, during the first workshop held on January 7th, we provided an overview of the methods that we use to identify a number of potential housing opportunity sites across the city, which are shown here on this map in orange. If you would like to take a look at what those methods were and how we came up with them, or just take a closer look at this map, please visit riversideca.gov/housing update to view those materials. We'll also be demonstrating later on an interactive tool that you can use to provide your comments on specific opportunity sites later in the presentation. Next slide, please. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the update involves several pieces of the city's General Plan 2025. So the General Plan, which every city and county in California is required to have in place and update periodically, sets out the city's long-term plan for growth and development, including the provision of necessary public services and amenities like police and fire service, parks and utility infrastructure to serve residents and businesses. The general plan covers a number of key topic areas called elements, including housing and land use, public safety, natural conservation, health, and more. Each element sets out broad goals, what kind of city we will be in the future, and then provides specific strategies to realize those goals and concrete actions that we should take in order to get there. The update will refresh the housing and public safety elements of the General Plan 2025, which was adopted originally in 2007. It will also include the incorporation of environmental justice policies, which is a new requirement that is not currently reflected in the existing General Plan. These three pieces are being updated now to meet our October 2021 deadline. However, think of this as the first phase of a more comprehensive update of the entire General Plan, the city's vision for the next 25 or more years that will be kicking off soon and plan to have complete sometime in the next 3 years. Next slide, please. All right, I'd like to take a minute now to reintroduce the team that the city has assembled to assist us with this complex and far-reaching planning project. So leading this effort is Haziel Levine Associates, which is an urban planning and design firm focused on innovative, collaborative, and technology-driven approaches to planning issues, based in Chicago with local operations out of Pasadena. We have Veronica Tam Associates, who are widely recognized as the leading experts in housing elements, having assisted dozens of California cities and counties to prepare over 100 housing plans and offering that same expertise to our project. Next, we have ICF with a broad range of expertise in environmental planning and compliance, leading the public safety element, environmental justice policies, and the complex work of preparing an environmental impact report for this project. Ariano Associates specializes in communications and public outreach, particularly for land use and transportation planning projects, and is assisting with the public participation component of the project, including tonight's workshop. Fair & Peers is leading the transportation analysis piece of the project, providing technical expertise as to how the update can work with the city's existing and planned transportation networks as efficiently as possible. And then finally, Best and Krieger is advising the project team on legal matters to make sure that everything we do is in full compliance with the law. Next slide, please. All right, so some of our team members are here with us tonight, including Rob Matthews, who's our lead consultant, and Brian Sims, who's our technical lead with Houseo Levine Associates. We have Amber Gregg representing Veronica Tam Associates tonight, Deborah Light with ICF, and JC Lacey with Ariano Associates. Next slide, please. Okay. So to start us off, we are going to ask some poll questions. So we're going to start with some basic questions to give you an opportunity to test out the polling feature and also give us an idea of who's in the room tonight. So I'm going to hand it over to our friends from Ariano to get this poll going.
Okay, just one moment. We have a slight technical difficulty on this. Just one moment. Bear with us just a second here.
Yeah.
Okay, Matthew, we're gonna have to move to the next slide, and we'll come right back to the poll number 1.
Okay, no problem. All right, so then I think at this point, I believe we are going to hand it over to, just one moment here. Okay, so I think at this point we are with Veronica Tam Associates, who's going to give us a little bit more background on RHNA and the housing element process itself. So Amber, if you're ready, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. My name is Amber Gregg, as Matthew had said, and I just want to thank everyone for having me here tonight and for also taking time out of your schedule to be with us here tonight. So as you said, I'm going to go over a little bit of the fun stuff, which is, what do we look like today as Riverside? So currently our population is just over 328,000, and we have slowly been growing, as you can see by the little table off to the left-hand side. And out of that population, we have almost 91,000 households. And the way our households are broken up, you can see on the right with housing type, almost 40% of them are made up of families with children. 25% have somebody 65 years of age or older living with them. 20% are singles. Just over 7% are over 65, and about 10.5% are single parent households. Next slide, please. So what does our population look like? Well, like most places, we are an aging population. So in the teal colors, 2018 versus 2010. So from 18 years and older, you can see that we are aging. And then in the 17 and under, we have less children today than we did in 2010. And what does our population look like? Well, we are becoming definitely a more diverse population, with all minorities increasing and the Hispanic Latino. Next slide, please. For the Riverside household, this one has to do with income distribution. And it's important to note that we don't come up with the income distribution. It is set by the state. So our area in Riverside County is approximately $73,000 a year. And the way our income is distributed is 63% of our households are either moderate or above, 15% are categorized as low income, and 11% make up each very low and extremely low income categories. Now, another thing to be mindful of is that housing is considered affordable if occupants pay no more than 30% of their income in housing. Again, we're not talking about affordable housing. We're talking about if your housing is actually affordable for those occupants. So if you think about it, if you on your household income pay more than 30%, then your household is not considered affordable. And with increased prices in California, more and more people are outside of that 30% range. Next slide, please. So what exactly is a HELMN? Well, Matthew had touched on it. It's a part of our general plan, and a general plan is a fancy word for just saying the blueprint of the city as it's growing out. And the housing element specifically focuses on the city and how we are going to grow that housing. It also provides an assessment of the city's housing needs and how best to accommodate the needs of not only our existing residents, but of our future residents. And a lot of time it's those future residents that are hard for us to envision. It sets citywide goals, objectives, and policies for housing. And it also identifies housing conditions and needs within the community. So for our special community groups, it must be updated every 8 years according to law. And for us here at Riverside County, we have to have it updated by October 15th, 2021. And as part of that, the state also has to review the housing element and certify it prior to that date. Next slide, please. So what are the housing element requirements? Well, the first one is to accommodate the projected housing demand that's mandated by the state. Every 8 years, the city gives estimates for the entire state of how much they think that we're going to grow. And each city is allocated a certain amount, and we have to accommodate that. And we're going to go into that a little bit more in the upcoming slides. We also need to identify how we're going to produce these units that we need to accommodate, as well as preserve existing affordable housing. Affordable housing is extremely expensive to build, and the most economical thing is preserving what we have in place. We also need to improve the safety, quality, and conditioning of our existing houses. So for a lot of our historic neighborhoods, we want to make sure that they're well maintained and don't become blighted. And we also need to facilitate the development of housing for all income levels and household types, including special needs populations. And then we want to make sure that we're also promoting fair housing choice for all, which is just another way of saying that we want to make sure people have choices on where they can live. Next slide. So some people might say, well, why do we have to do this? What if we just don't, we're tired of the state telling us what to do? You know, what's the harm in this? So there are actually consequences for not having a compliant housing element. The first and foremost is the risk of litigation. The Office of Housing and Community Development, which is the state office, actually monitors cities that are compliant or not in compliance with their housing element. And they report these non-compliant cities to the Attorney General. And just to kind of show how much the state values housing and the importance that they're putting on it at this time, a court can impose fines up to $100,000 per month if a city falls out of compliance. Some cities have been sued by the Attorney General. Other cities have had injunctions placed on them. And that's a fancy word for saying the city can't issue building permits. And if you think about it, you need a building permit for anything from a water heater to replacing your roof. So imposing that on a city really is a detriment. The other big thing is that it makes us ineligible for most state funding. So the state sends out a lot of grants for housing or for infrastructure. And one of the first questions is, do you have a compliant housing element? And if you say no, then you're ineligible to receive those grant funds. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are in what's called the 6 Regional Housing Needs Assessment Allocation. And what that means is that our portion of units that need to be developed are 18,415. I shouldn't say developed, that need to be planned for, are 18,415. And in addition to that, we want to give ourselves a buffer. So we don't want to plan for the bare minimum. And the reason for that is, let's say you have a property owner and they are allowed to build 100 units on their property, just for ease of numbers, but they only build 50. Well, then we would already be short the 50 units right out of the gate with that first development. So that buffer makes it so that we don't fall out of compliance with providing the ability to develop these units. Next slide, please. So RHNA, how do we get our RHNA numbers exactly? Well, it starts at the state and it disseminates from there. So the state identifies the total state need, and then they break it up between regional planning agencies. Our regional planning agency is called SCAG, and that's the Southern California Association of Governments, and it makes up 6 counties in Southern California. And they had 1.3 million units that those 6 counties totally had to allocate for. Riverside County's portion was 167,000, and then it gets distributed to all the cities and the counties itself in order to develop. So here you'll see our number of 18,415, and then also nearby communities. The closest one being Moreno Valley, accommodating for 13.5 thousand units. Next slide, please. So what do we do after we have all these workshops and get all these great ideas, and how do we make this housing element come to fruition? Well, we do it through programs and policies, and that becomes our housing plan inside the housing element. So some examples of what some of these potential housing programs or policies might be are listed here. So it could provide protections for existing tenants, promote rehabilitation of currently affordable units. That way we maintain them as affordable. It could facilitate more ADU development, and ADU stands for accessory dwelling unit, something that the state really has enabled recently. Addresses barriers to housing development by streamlining approvals, meaning that houses can come online and get permitted quicker. Inclusionary zones for minimum percent of affordability units, number of projects. That would mean that each development would have to provide a certain amount of affordable units. By right approval for residential projects when 20% of the units are affordable. Establish minimum densities that support developments of affordable housing, and provide density transfer or in lieu fee to build below allowable or assumed
Next slide. This location, like many across the city, is well served by transit. Here, again, you see the 5 and 10-minute walkable areas and in the distance there around Metrolink in yellow and orange. Next slide. When we add the opportunity sites in dark orange, you can see that many of them are within these transit areas, making them strong locations. Next slide. And here's another close-up showing access in this area to parks, open space, and recreation opportunities at the local scale. Again, there are many sites that would allow future residents to walk to these important destinations. These are just some examples of the type of analysis we do to ensure that housing will be located to provide the most benefits to residents. Next slide. So there is development happening all the time, and even in the business as usual scenario, there are projects in what we call the project pipeline that will produce housing. Next slide. These can be catalyst sites that help stimulate additional development over time, like this mixed-use project on Iowa Avenue, which will provide 299 housing units on about 13 acres with some ground-level retail space when it's completed. Next slide. For the business-as-usual scenario, we keep the same zoning as the existing conditions and calculate how much housing potential exists before making any other changes. Like nearly all Southern California cities, the current zoning in Riverside is insufficient to meet the state's RHNA obligation, which is why we need to look at other scenarios to achieve those numbers. The opportunity sites in this area are mostly zoned for industrial, commercial, or mixed use. Next slide. In the focused growth scenario, we recommend more development in the areas that have good access to transit and other services I mentioned earlier. Since a smaller number of sites are doing the heavy lifting, you can see that most of the industrial and manufacturing areas zoning remain as is. As a trade-off, the commercially zoned land in the transit areas is changed to mixed use. This still allows most commercial activities, but will now additionally allow housing. The current mixed use areas are also expanded. Next slide. In the dispersed scenario, development is spread out less intensely over more land. So you can see that most of the industrial areas would change to a combination of lower intensity mixed use and multifamily R3 zoning. Because this location is near high capacity transit, the mixed use areas are expanded and commercial areas would be zoned for mixed use, like the focused scenario, but not as intensely. Next slide. Let's return to the focused growth scenario and look at the types of buildings that could be built. Because we focus growth into a smaller area in this scenario, most of the currently industrial I and BMP zoned areas won't change, maintaining these lands for important economic activities into the future. Next slide. The mixed-use village areas allow for commercial uses and housing. It's important to note that existing businesses can continue to operate indefinitely, even with zoning changes. The zoning changes only come into effect if and when a property redevelops in the future, which is a decision made by landowners and developers, not the city. Next slide. Next slide. Since the areas in purple were already zoned for mixed use, they won't change, but developers could still pursue the additional density bonuses due to proximity to transit in these important areas. Next slide. So now let's shift gears to our second close-up through these slides more quickly, since there are many similar patterns. Next slide. Here, again, in the existing situation, you can see the zoning for opportunity sites. Next slide. This area also has strong access to Rapid Link. Next slide. And it also has strong access to Metrolink, being that it's located near both of those stations, which is excellent. Next slide. For the business as usual scenario, the opportunity sites are mostly commercial with some mixed use and a small amount of residential single family, the areas in yellow. Next slide. In the dispersed growth scenario, we would change the commercial areas to mixed use and R3. The small pocket of single family and the both remain as is. Next slide. For the focused growth scenario, the single family area might change to R4 multifamily since it is in close proximity to transit. Areas elsewhere in the city can remain as is. The existing mixed use remains as is, and the commercial areas are zoned for high density mixed use. And unlike the dispersed scenario, all of the current commercial areas would support mixed use development. Next slide. So here again are the building types for our two-story townhouses or garden apartments for that area that's located in the circle there. Next slide. And this mixed-use village zone for three-story development of housing can occur with or without commercial spaces, as is true for all of the mixed-use zones. Next slide. The mixed-use urban 4+ story development, as we've seen before, could be located in the area circled on screen. Next slide. And in the area you see circled there, the potential for taller 6-story transit proximity. Next slide. Returning to the focused growth scenario for this area, the R4 zone here would allow for 3-story multifamily apartments or condos. Next slide. Mixed-use village zoning for 3-story buildings. The area you see circled there is already zoned mixed-use urban, and so common to both the dispersed and focused scenarios and allows 4-story buildings. Next slide. This area would also be mixed-use urban with in both scenarios. And so it's important to remember that these are just some example areas and that we're looking at this analysis across the entire city and that the slightly different. And that's why getting feedback is potential scenarios. Next slide. So in summary, overall, the dispersed growth and some overlap in certain areas, but there are certainly some key differences as well. First off, the dispersed growth pattern has a lower intensity that uses more land affected by zoning changes. It's less likely to provide the densities needed for affordable housing, but we at the same time would need to rezone sufficiently to meet the affordable housing goal for RHNA under any circumstance. It also places fewer homes near transit and less industrial and commercial land. Has higher intensity development, which affects by zoning changes. It's more likely to provide densities needed for affordable housing. It would provide more homes near transit and other important destinations, make more efficient use of existing infrastructure, and ultimately preserve more industrial and commercial land. Going forward, this is not an either-or proposition. Scenarios are meant to help us think about and communicate possibilities. Your feedback is important, and as we gear up for round 3 of our engagement, we'll take your comments and the best ideas from both scenarios and merge them together in some fashion into a preferred alternative that attempts to best meet the city's need for sustainable growth while at the same time meeting these stringent RHNA requirements. Next slide. And with that, I would like to hand things back to Matthew.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. So at this point, we would like to pause for some Q&A. We're going to spend about 10 minutes on Q&A based on some of the questions that we have been receiving in the chat. And we've got a number of questions coming in, so thank you everyone for your enthusiastic participation. This is exactly what we were hoping for. So let's see if we can try to answer some questions. So just a housekeeping question right off the top from Maribel. can we get the housing element presentation via email or posted on the Riverside City Housing Element? Yes, the short answer to that is we will be putting the presentation along with that you're viewing right now, along with video of this meeting to the project website in the next few days after this meeting. The next question, we have a question from JD. Is this housing project you're creating going to add to the gentrification of Riverside, or are you actually making this housing opportunity affordable for the lower working class? This is COVID time. We are talking about, can we focus our housing on housing the unhoused community? So I would like Amber to help to talk about some of the affordability requirements that we need to meet with this project and how we can make sure that we're accommodating housing for all income levels, including those with lower incomes. So Amber, did you have anything you could add to that?
Yes, absolutely. But Matthew, can you do me a favor and repeat the beginning part of your question? I didn't catch it.
Yes. So is this housing project you're creating going to add to the gentrification of Riverside, or are you actually making this housing opportunity affordable for the lower working class? That was the first portion of the question.
Okay, thank you. So what the state requires is that we not only plan for market rate, but we also have to plan for all affordability levels. And so the hard part is getting those units developed. So through this process, we're brainstorming ways on how to either require affordability for each one or have other different ways to meet those requirements to make sure that we do have affordable levels.
All right. Question from Jeffrey. Just a second here. The interactive map shows the RHNA opportunity sites, but there's no list or legend that denotes these sites or what they actually include, nor does it show parcel numbers. Is there a way we can get a list with the APNs for the sites identified? In short, yes, we will be able to provide that. However, the final site selection has not been finalized at this point. So we have, the map that you're seeing is a list of potential opportunity sites everywhere. We will be finalizing those sites and have a list available most likely around the time that we define our preferred alternative so that we can begin the CEQA analysis. In the meantime, we'd encourage you to take a look at the map.social, which we're going to demo for you later in the meeting. Okay, we have a question from BA Doing. The number of people who will age into retirement will increase dramatically in the next 30 years. Will housing plans be developed for low-income elderly people who live on a fixed income? Amber, could you help us with that question about housing for special populations in the housing element?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is an entire section of the housing element that's dedicated to our housing needs as well as special needs groups, and seniors fall into that area. So we will be looking at the age of that population, how much additional senior housing is needed, how much additional affordable senior housing would be needed. So yes, that is taken into account.
Right. Great. Thank you. Next couple of questions from Tom. Is the city challenging the state RHNA numbers for the city of Riverside? And separately, is student housing considered in our housing numbers? So to the first part of your question, the city has not challenged the RHNA allocation. As you know, we have watched other appeals and challenges to the RHNA allocation kind of work their way through the process. Virtually none of them are being granted, we're seeing, which I think is to be expected. And so partly for that reason, the city did not appeal its RHNA allocation. Is student housing considered in our housing numbers? So actually, Amber, I'm going to ask you again about how student housing particularly fits into the RHNA picture.
Okay, so there's a couple different ways that we have student housing in our community, right? So we have dormitory style, and then we actually have apartments dedicated to students. So the dormitory style ones, because it's not permanent housing, don't count towards actual housing units. But if we're talking about apartments, those do count towards our overall housing units. And although students aren't technically considered to fall under affordable housing, if we have their income levels, it can count towards that.
Thank you. Okay. let's see, a few more questions. We have a question from our YouTube live stream. Good afternoon. Are the house prices going to drop on price due to COVID? So I think what we're seeing is that has not been the case, especially during the last year for the Inland Empire region specifically. We have seen rents increase. So that's all the more reason why we need to be thinking about and planning for affordable housing, and that's a big part of this project. So thank you for that question from YouTube. Okay. Lindsay asks, what is the total amount of acreage available for the construction of housing within the Riverside city limits? So I don't know if we will be able to give you the absolute total of all land, but I do believe we can tell you about the acreage of the opportunity sites that we've identified. And I'm actually going to hand that to Rob if you're able to potentially answer that question. And if not, we can come back to it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have that number right off the top of my head. Let me see if I can try to wrangle up a response and respond to that in our second Q&A.
All right, great.
Otherwise, we can follow up and provide that information.
Great, thank you. Okay, question from Jason. Marietta is about 1/3 the size of Riverside, but has about 1/6 the RHNA requirement. How does that work? Amber, can you tell us a little bit about how the allocation methodology factors things like employment access and transportation opportunities into how the RHNA numbers are divided amongst cities in the same area?
Yeah, I think you hit it off to a good start there. It does take into each individual community and how its access to public transit is taken into account. It also looks at what the past unit development has been and if we need to make up for units as well. And then they come up and look at each community to come up with the final number.
Okay, question from Connie. What defines an ADU? I'm happy to answer that for you, Connie. An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. So that's a smaller, typically smaller, fully self-contained housing unit that is on the same property or even attached to an existing house. It's called accessory because they are often significantly smaller than a primary dwelling and are not considered the main use on the lot, which is why we call them accessory. So that's an ADU. ADUs are going to be part of our approach to meeting our RHNA, although not a significant part, just because the development trends that we have seen so far with ADUs in Riverside are just too small to make that large of an impact on our housing needs. But we will look at them regardless. Question from Tom again. What is your definition of affordable housing? Is it cost to the homeowner or renter? Amber, can you just remind our folks here how we define our affordability levels?
Yeah, so the affordability levels are set dependent on the area median income. And there are various affordability levels based on if you're a single person household, all the way up to having multiple people within your household. So for Riverside, our area median income is approximately $73,000. And then they basically take 30% of each of those categories, and that's how the affordability is set.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have time for maybe one or two more questions in this round of Q&A before we need to move on to the next portion of the presentation. So a question from Keith, how is affordable housing made attractive to developers without a subsidy to fill the gap between the costs and necessary profitability to get the essential investment? So I will ask Amber again to take this question first, and then maybe we might also hear from Jeff McLaughlin with the city's housing authority about how that plays out here in Riverside.
Okay, so there are multiple ways that city can help with the affordability levels. Some of those happen to be as part of incentives. If a developer is willing to build affordability, but maybe it can't be affordable based on the requirements, let's say, for example, parking. Parking is always a big one. Then the city might look at subsidies for parking, reducing the number of parking spaces that a development can have. Likewise, if the city has surplus properties that they need to sell, a lot of times they can provide that information to affordable housing developers in order to help with affordable housing to help bridge that gap as well.
Great. Thank you, Amber. Jeff, did you have anything that you could add about what the city does to assist with the feasibility of affordable housing?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much, Matt. The city does many things. Directly, we facilitate affordable housing through municipal subsidy of affordable housing units in exchange for very long-term affordability of those units. We will work with developers to try to speed the development process along, because time is money in the development process. We've looked at new partnerships to develop affordable housing on sites, most successfully, I think, churches over the last couple of years. And we are funding new housing types throughout the city in the neighborhood-sensitive context, like tiny homes and ADUs. So we are we're trying many ways to subsidize housing, work with developers to make it easier to build housing. The potentially density bonuses and other things that we can use to facilitate. So we have a number of tools at our disposal to assist when a developer comes forward and wants to build affordable units in the city.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, so that is about all the time we have for the first round of Q&A. We will have additional Q&A, and then remember, again, we will have also open discussion at the end of the meeting here. So if we didn't get to your question, we will try to come back to it as best we can. At this point, I believe we would like to do an additional poll to ask you this time about some of the scenarios that Rob demonstrated for a while ago, just a little while ago. So if we can have the second poll queued up, and Ariano, if you want to, there we go. It's on your screen now. Now, go ahead, JC.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you there, but wanted to jump right into the second poll. It's the same process as before. We have our timer. I'll read through these questions, but you can see them here. We want to get a significant amount of responses before we close it. Based on the scenarios you've just seen, what should be the city's overall approach to planning for new housing? And then you have answers there. You can read through. This one we may need to give you a couple more seconds here because it's a bit more information as we warned about earlier. This one's a little bit more involved. Choose two of the following general principles that the city should follow when planning where new housing should go. This one's multiple choice. There are fewer questions here. They're more detailed, but there's only 3. So. The housing element will include a zoning plan that will identify locations for new housing. What should be the city's priorities in developing the zoning plan? Choose up to 3, multiple choice.
And as JC said, since these questions are a little bit more involved, I think we're going to try to give a little bit more time for these responses. So let you kind of work through them.
We do have the answer in the roll in here. Thank you for your participation.
And thank you. We had someone in the chat point out that there is a typo in one of the response options for question 2. It says new housing should be transit, etc. That response should be new housing should be focused near transit.
Yep, we're at about 26%, and these are longer questions, just crossed 30. So we're coming in. Thank you very much. Just as a reminder to everyone, the ASL interpreter is spotlighted. They do switch up from time to time. So you may need to change your view. Just be aware, if you need the ASL interpretation, if you don't see them, we do keep them pinned. You may need to change your view. And we're over 40% here. Thank you. We're getting a lot of good responses and questions and comments in the Q&A. So again, thank you for your participation there. As Matthew mentioned a little earlier, there will be a dialogue portion if we didn't get to your questions, or if you had something very specific to ask, there will be a portion for that as well. We just crossed 55% on this poll. And Matthew, I will take your cue as to when we should shut it down. I don't want to have anyone almost done not get counted, so let's just give it a few more seconds. Okay.
Just hit 60%, so I think we're gonna go ahead and close the poll now. Okay, so based on the responses of people who participated in the poll, we've got some highlights here. So it looks like among the scenarios that we presented as options, it looks like the majority of people, 2/3, prefer a blended scenario, which is good news because there's really no one-size-fits-all approach to this. It's going to take a more kind of nuanced and hybridized approach to what we do to make sure that we put the right the right development potential in the right locations. So it's encouraging to see that people are picking up on that. Most popular response for question 2 is that new housing should be focused around existing services like jobs, schools, and shopping. The next most popular response is that new housing should be incorporated with existing development like shopping centers and industrial parks. And finally, highlighting the last question here, the most popular response is that the plan should make housing more affordable to lower income households. And then another high popularity response, the plan should minimize traffic congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. So thanks again, everyone, for your participation in that poll. We are going to, of course, these responses are going to inform the final plan that we develop over the next month or so. I did want to add, too, that these poll questions are also going to be developed into a new survey that we'll be putting on the project website. So some of you may have completed the survey that is currently up on the project website. If you haven't and would like to do so, it will stay up until tomorrow morning. So feel free to take that survey if you haven't already. And then in the next few days, we'll be adding a new survey to focus on these topics that are similar to the poll questions that you're seeing here. So, okay. All right, we have come to the time now to hand it over to Deborah with ICF to talk a little bit about the environmental justice, public safety portions of the plan, and also the CEQA environmental review process and where we're at with that. So Deborah, if you want to go ahead and take it away, please.
Sure, thank you, Matthew. I'm Deborah Light with ICF. I'm the environmental compliance lead for the project. During the first information meeting a few weeks ago, we discussed these items that are all part of the general plan update for the entire program. And so I'll just summarize these today. This general plan update involves many individual elements, as you see listed here in this slide, which will require environmental compliance. As a requirement of California laws like CEQA, we talked about California Environmental Quality Act is what it stands for. A project will need to be evaluated to determine its environmental impacts. The housing and public safety elements, as well as the environmental justice policies and zoning changes, are all in collaboration. They're all a part of the overall update, and their implementation could result in significant environmental effects. And those effects will all be evaluated in an environmental impact report or an EIR. Next slide, please. As you know, last year and continuing into this year, Riverside experienced a pandemic. Well, the world did, but we definitely felt it pretty hard here in the city. The city also experienced civic unrest, riots, wildfire, flash floods, and other natural and man-made hazards. These environmental concerns, including drought, climate change, earthquakes, and other geologic hazards, and even homelessness, are public safety hazards that are complex issues requiring city-specific solutions to protect the public safety. The public safety element update, which is a requirement of the city's general plan, will identify these hazards and also ways to reduce impacts to guide local decisions related to zoning and development regulations. Policies in the public safety element will include ways to minimize risk and economic disruption to speed up recovery following disasters and other public safety hazards. The public safety element will be updated to comply with some recent legal updates that require the public safety element to be updated alongside the housing element to address things like flooding and fire hazards, climate adaptation and resiliency strategies, among other environmental hazards. Next slide. This update to the housing and public safety elements will require new environmental justice policies, sometimes shortened to EJ. The definition of EJ is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Just today, the president signed several executive orders regarding climate change and its impact on EJ populations that sometimes affect disadvantaged communities more than other populations. As a part of the city's update, environmental justice policies will be developed for the housing and public safety elements, which is a new requirement for updates to these elements. These EJ policies will address the disproportionately high and adverse human health and environmental impacts, specifically on minority and low-income populations. And, we're still going through a lot of the opportunity sites. We're still doing a lot of work, but some of the general themes for these policies will involve reducing exposure to population and greenhouse gases in disadvantaged communities, promoting public health in disadvantaged communities by improving public facilities, encouraging physical activity, and promoting food access, and also promoting safe, sanitary, and affordable housing in disadvantaged communities that are compatible with existing land uses. These environmental justice policies will address issues related to public and environmental health, climate change, and social equity as a part of the housing and public safety elements. This process includes conducting community outreach, just like today, that we're currently here to get your input into the process to better understand the unique challenges faced by disadvantaged and really all communities throughout the city. Next slide, please. So here's the term CEQA again. So I want to at least provide some good just context on what CEQA is, so that way it's understood what it is and why we're undergoing through this process. So CEQA's main purpose is to inform the public and decision makers about a project. In this case, the project is the general plan update and the environmental impacts that could result with the project. The environmental documents that will be prepared as a part of CEQA for this project, including an initial study and environmental impact report, or EIR, will discuss policies, project features that will avoid and reduce impacts, and recommend mitigation and project alternatives that would reduce those impacts. One of the most important aspects of CEQA is the opportunity it gives to the public and agencies for input and for comment into the environmental review process. Next slide, please. Matthew previously discussed the overall project schedule. However, this schedule focuses more on the environmental review process. Right now, we're in the middle of the second information meeting, as you can see. And really, this whole process that we're engaging today, and we did a few weeks ago, and with the follow-up round 3 preferred alternative discussion, is all occurring ahead of the CEQA process because we want to get that input right now. So before we start on CEQA, those opportunities to get your input will help us to inform what the preferred alternative is, and then that preferred alternative will be evaluated in the EIR as the project. Today, we are here to provide information about the secret process, really in anticipation of the documents that will be released for the public for review. And you can see the schedule that the NOP and initial study is expected in early spring 2021. So really in just a couple of months. So documents like the NOP and initial study, the draft EIR, and the final EIR are all items that will be prepared and released for agency and public review. And those are all opportunities to provide additional input and to provide your comment that will help inform the process. Our purpose today is to make sure that we give you a heads up of when these will be available, as you can see in the schedule, and to get your input on that preferred alternative ahead of even us completing the environmental review process and any of these environmental documents that we've talked about. And then that concludes the environmental portion. Matthew, I think you're up next.
Great. Thank you so much, Deborah. Okay, we are going to pause again to take a few more questions. And so we are going to, related to the topics that Deborah covered for us, plus anything that we may have missed from the last round of questions. So at this point, let's go ahead and I will jump right in. Let's see, question from Lindsay. Riverside has long been opposed to high-rise buildings. Is there a movement to gain acceptance of them as a solution to making more housing available? So I think, cities, as cities grow, they grow up. That tends to be something that happens. And Riverside is no exception to that case, as we continue to be sort of the premier city of the inland region in terms of job, employment, and cultural opportunities and education. We are going to see more pressure for more opportunities to make Riverside your home for more folks. And as that happens, we will need to begin to embrace some different types of living styles. And I think you're starting to see this trend emerge in our downtown area, which has some newer, higher density housing developments that have opened recently. And over time, you may see this begin to occur in other areas of the city that are well served by transportation, have good access to shopping and services and amenities, and become more desirable places to live. So I think that will continue. Question from JD, is this project only to create more landlords who create more homes that cost Black people higher interest? So one of the major goals of the housing element is to ensure that we are planning for an adequate amount of housing for all people at all income levels. I think Amber touched a little bit on some ways that we can do that. But I do want to reiterate that the policies and programs piece, so the housing element is a lot about the sites inventory and zoning and development, but it is also about policies and programs that we put in place to make sure that we are able to provide or that there is an adequate supply of housing for people at all different income levels and of all different backgrounds. And so that's going to be a big part of this project. Let's see, what else do we have here? Another question from Lindsay, available acreage divided by number of housing units needed equals housing units per acre. I think this is a question about just about how densities and dwelling units per acre works and what those numbers mean. And the short answer is yes, going back to Rob's portion of the presentation where he showed what the same number of housing units at different densities sort of looks like conceptually. It is a pretty basic, just a division of the number of housing units by the acres of land. Next question. Let's see. Canyon Crest and Hawarden Hills need more high density housing, right? So we are, there are certain areas of the city that have constraints due to natural conditions, natural hazards such as wildfire or flooding, topography. Some locations of the city are difficult to locate new housing in because they are in flight paths for one of the several airports that are in the area and are not suitable for higher intensity land uses. On the other hand, we are trying to ensure that we are not overburdening any one particular area or another with large amounts of new housing. We are trying to do as best we can in distributing our RHNA obligation throughout various areas of the city that are suitable. I would encourage you to take a look at the story map from the last meeting, which does walk through what some of those considerations are for how we identify locations where housing can go. Okay, we have a longer question here. There are not enough funds in the public safety department to pay for mental health and public safety professionals to respond to mental health related 911 calls. I found this out the hard way from the police who showed up when a friend made a suicide hotline call. The presence of the police only exacerbated my friend's condition and the whole situation turned violent. In short, will the future public safety funding include funds for mental health public safety personnel to respond to mental health calls? So this is a good question. So on one hand, the general plan and the housing and public safety element specifically doesn't set budgeting or funding priorities directly, although it does have it can have an influence on them. But at the same time, there could be, if a need is identified, to create policies in that element that would support such things like expanded mental health services. So those things, there is an opportunity to address some of that in that element. Let's see, how are we on time? A few more minutes, time for a few more questions here. Riverside, a question from Eileen. Riverside already has water and rolling blackouts. How do you see handling all these additional people and their needs for water, electricity, et cetera? Deborah, can you talk a little bit about how we will evaluate impacts to public services and infrastructure through CEQA?
Absolutely. So as a part of the environmental review process, there's a lot of research that goes along with this process. So we will contact the utility agencies and really get a good basis for what is the existing condition. And then we'll also get an idea of what is growth. So what is the city planning for in terms of utilities? In terms of those individual projects, they will have to undergo their own review with the utilities directly. So that way they're paying their fair share, or they're upgrading facilities in the area to accommodate that level of growth. So that way, you won't have issues of, loss of utility or, a strain on the existing utility systems because of this growth. So the EIR will evaluate this at a much higher level, providing a lot of research to help support the discussion of, what additional impacts will that result in, but also those individual projects themselves will undergo their own individual evaluation, connecting with those utility companies directly.
Thank you, Deborah. Let's see, I'm gonna queue up a few more questions here. If Ariano, you could give me a time check when you get the opportunity. Okay. Question from Mohammed. Can you request certain property to be rezoned to increase density and meet some of the housing needs? We can consider suggestions for particular sites where housing would or would not be a good idea. And any other suggestions that folks have about a particular type of housing or type of zoning or anything else in a particular location. We would encourage you to make use of the map.social tool again, that we are going to be demonstrating in just a little while. Question from Tom. What is your definition of affordability? You can have affordable units, but can people qualify for these units with their income level? I think we more or less answered this question previously, but Amber, is there anything that you can additional that you can share about how the various income levels are defined in terms of low, very low, et cetera?
Yes, but I think the question's getting more at for an individual. And I want to point out that, yes, it is based on the individual or individuals who are applying for it. So it's not just one set rate, but it's actually adjusted based on your personal income to make sure it doesn't exceed that 30%. So I hope that answers that question a little bit clearer.
Thank you very much. Okay, another question for you, Amber. Again, this question's from Maribel. Only 42% of, I assume this means of our RHNA allocation for very low income and low income affordable housing, 7,906 out of 18,415 total housing units. Can we increase affordable housing and can we include non-renting within the RHNA specifically for very low and low income numbers? Can you help us with that question, Amber?
Yeah, of course. So it's important to remember that RHNA is a bare minimum. So it's the minimum amount of housing that we need to be planning for. We can always have more affordable housing than that, but it just gives us our minimum to plan for.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Has the question from Daniel, has the city as a whole over the past 20 years performed population or housing density studies? If so, have we been using those models to grow and plan the residential and housing growth of the city? So the short answer there is yes. We periodically, about every 10 years or so, although sometimes it's a little longer based on what a large undertaking it is, we comprehensively update the city's general plan. I think I mentioned earlier in the meeting that the last time the general plan was updated was 2007. We are going to be, this project, in fact, is essentially a phase one of the next comprehensive update of the general plan. We'll be taking a look at land use and development patterns, growth patterns, population growth or migration changes, employment, education, public services, infrastructure, parks, everything that affects the physical life of the city, and taking a look at where we're headed and where we want to head and how we can plan to get there. So this exercise is something that we do periodically as cities, and we are preparing to kick that off in earnest again within the next 3 years or so. So stay tuned for that. Let's see. A couple more questions before we move on to the next section. Question from Brianna. I may have missed this, but are the homeless housing units counted in the total housing units? Amber, can you help us understand how things like shelter beds and other transitional housing might factor into the housing element and our numbers?
Yeah, so as part of the housing element, we do need to take population into consideration and look at emergency shelters and our ability to shelter our homeless population. So the short answer for emergency shelters is no, that doesn't count towards our housing needs. What we're looking at is housing dwelling units, not temporary housing. So those would not be accounted for. But again, they are required by state law for us to plan for them.
Very good. Okay. Okay, so we're right at about 7:30 now. I do want to make sure that we don't cut into time for open discussion. So I want to move into the next piece, the next portion of our presentation here. And the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to do one last poll. So this poll, again, we'll give a few minutes for you to review these questions. This poll specifically has questions about policies and programs that the city might look into to support housing, particularly affordable housing. So this poll has a few questions. So we'll give you some time to do that. And JC, if you want to take this poll here.
Sure. Thank you, Matthew. We have 4 questions. The same format as before. I want to give you an opportunity to read them without talking over you here, but these questions are, which of the following strategies do you think would be most effective in making housing more affordable in Riverside? So you can choose multiple choices on that one. Other question, what should the city do to increase the availability of affordable housing? Choose up to 2 that you prefer the most. And this is, again, another multiple choice question here. The other question here, number 3, says, what programs should the city focus on to make housing more affordable in Riverside? You can choose up to 2 that you prefer the most. And there's the last question here for the ASL and the chat. When new housing is constructed in Riverside, what can be done to ensure that more of it is affordable? So we'll give you some time to answer these. It looks like we have some results coming in. Thank you again for your participation. This is very useful and helpful for this process. Just hit 15%. Okay, here we go. They're really coming in now. Takes a little time, but then they all come in together. So we're approaching 50%. And I believe this is the final poll of the evening. So again, thank you. As a reminder, the meeting will be recorded and posted to the project website. We'll go over that at the end. There'll be a little bit of dialogue, some time for that, and a next step. So more ways to gather more information from you. Before we close out, we will leave you with ways to leave more information. Okay, we've crossed 55, 56%. And we're at about 3 minutes. Matthew, let us know when you're ready to transition.
Sure, I think we'll give it about another 30 seconds here.
Okay, great.
Okay, last few seconds here, so get those answers in if you're still voting. And we can go ahead and close that poll now. All right, very good. Okay, so strategies the city that would be effective to make housing more affordable. Our most popular response here was 71% of respondents saying provide financial assistance to help build new housing in exchange for guaranteed affordability. So sort of building on that model is seen as a good strategy. Let's see. To increase the availability, look to increase the number and variety of affordable units. So different types of housing for different folks in different situations is important. And then finally, what programs should the city focus on to make housing more affordable? Most popular response here is financial assistance to those who rent, especially with lower incomes, to purchase homes. And then second most popular, seek money from the state or the federal government to build or help build new affordable units. So really good feedback with that poll here. Oh, looks like I missed one. When new housing is constructed, what can we do to make sure more of it's affordable? Most popular response: require new housing to set aside a certain portion of units at prices affordable to lower income households, with 2/3 of respondents saying that that's a good strategy to pursue. This feedback and the survey that we post with similar questions are really going to help us shape our policy approach to the housing element. So your feedback's really critical here, and we appreciate these responses. So that will do it for poll number 3. Let's move on now to, I believe, yes, we are going to demonstrate map.social to give you an opportunity to provide your feedback on specific sites and locations. So Rob, if you want to take that away.
Yes, thank you, Matthew. Yeah, I wanted to share this other opportunity for you to provide input. If you were with us for the first meeting, this is just the same thing as before. If you weren't, let me introduce it. So you can use the link that you see here in blue on screen to access our map-based commenting app called map.social. You can also find the link on the city's Housing Element Update website if you don't happen to catch it during the meeting. You can create your own login information, or if you prefer anonymity, you can use the email and password information provided on the page here, the riverside@map.social, password Riverside 2020 #. Next slide. So here's some tips for using map.social. It's very easy. You can pan and zoom around the map and look at the potential opportunity sites. You can zoom in to someplace specific that's of interest to you. And then all you need to do is click the location where you want to make a comment or provide some kind of feedback. And those comments can be about good or bad locations for housing. Or if we haven't identified a site and you think it should be added to our list, you can use the potential housing site as an option. And then finally, you can also comment on anything related to public safety, environmental justice, or any other thing using the other category. Next slide. Once you do that, you simply add your thoughts. You just need to give it a title and a description, and please be as detailed as possible. If you think that an area is good or bad for housing, tell us why. You can also view other people's comments so you can understand what other people in the community are thinking. And the tool, like I said, is very easy to use. We really value your feedback. And this app will be available for the next few weeks as part of this round 2 of engagement. So please log on and submit your comments and thoughts. And Matthew, back to you to wrap up the call.
Okay, great. Let's see here. All right. So before we, thank you, Rob, before we jump into the open discussion portion, just a quick reminder about how you can stay connected with us here and continue to participate, including using map.social, which you just saw. Again, we'll be updating the project website with video and materials from tonight's meeting as well. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe for email updates to get all the information, including on the next workshop once it's announced, which we expect very shortly. And with that, at this point, we would like to open the floor for discussion, questions, comments, suggestions, concerns, hopes, dreams, fears, anything else about the project that you'd like to talk about with us. So what we are going to do now, and Ariano, please correct me if I get any of this wrong, but we are going to enable you to raise your hand now. You should be able to do that if you would like to speak, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, make a suggestion, anything of that nature. You can go ahead and use that raise hand tool, and we will call on you to speak. Let's see here. Oh, just as a reminder, depending again on which version of the Zoom app that you have, your raise hand is either going to be under the participants button or under the reactions button in the meeting tools. So we'll give folks a minute here to think about if they're going to Okay, looks like we've got a hand raised. Let's see. I apologize, this is a little bit new to me too. So, okay, we have Jason, followed by Sergio. Let's see. Okay, looks like that's all we have now. So I think Ariano is going to go ahead and give those folks an opportunity to unmute and make their comment or ask their question. So we'll hear from Jason first.
Hi there, good evening. It's Jason Hunter, Ward 1. My question is this, I look at and I read articles, and they're pretty prevalent these days about how the state of California's population growth is flattening out and actually heading towards decline if the trend continues. And I see your own charts from today showing how the population here is aging, meaning there's less people in that kind of key child rearing age. We're getting older and older. So my question is, where is this demand for housing coming from? Where are these people coming from in the future, given those trends? Are they moving from other parts of California to Riverside? And if so, what's going on as far as RHNA numbers in those parts of California? Do the state's RHNA numbers match the population trends we've seen, really in the last 5 to 10 years of sort of flattening out growth rate? Why do we need all these houses? Can somebody answer that?
Great, thank you. So I think we'll ask Amber to jump in here to provide some input on that the RHNA kind of process and the allocation that comes down from the state. I will say that I think your observation about internal movement is astute. Like I mentioned earlier, a great example of this, I think, right now, anecdotal as it may be, is that, while average rents in, kind of the central Los Angeles region, for instance, have declined during 2020, they have increased in the inland region and in Riverside. And I think that may point to some of that internal movement that you allude to. But Amber, do you want to add anything to that, particularly about how RHNA factors in population trends?
Yeah, the one thing that I would add on to that, that you hadn't hit on yet, Matthew, particularly, is the fact that the state feels like that we didn't develop to pass RHNA requirements either. So they're also kind of doing a bit of catch up with this. So based on the state, they feel that we have a housing shortage, which is why our rents are so high and the cost of housing is so high. So by producing more units with supply and demand, that would drive down the cost of housing, drive down the rents, and make all types of housing more affordable.
Great, thanks, Amber. All right, next we have Sergio. And then after Sergio, we'll hear from Keith and then Maribel. So Sergio, go ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, hey, first of all, I want to thank you all for having these presentations. I think, I'm sure they're probably required, but it's just important to have and solicit this feedback from everybody here. And I'm so glad to see there's so many people on here. But basically, I've lived in Riverside the majority of my life. I grew up here, as I'm sure many of us did. And I think for those of us that know Riverside well, it's become evident that the city is continuing to grow, well over 300,000 people at this point, yet it's also pretty evident that the available land, open space that is still in, near, and around Riverside it's increasingly diminishing. There's not a lot left, I think, if we're being very honest. And so at least the sense I got from this presentation is that to a certain extent, density is going to be key in the city's future planned growth. Now, I can't really point to any other cities in the Inland Empire that are doing that, or if they are, have it be mixed use, increased apartments. They're not particularly doing it well or effective. So my question is, with that being a potential factor, dense development, what are you folks, incorporating in terms of, comparisons to other model cities, other cities that may be doing this? So what is sort of that criteria for gaining that information? And how can we see that being incorporated to Riverside's unique culture? We see a lot of cities, like if you go to Anaheim, they've got mixed use, but it may not be conducive to the culture the neighborhoods know of. So essentially, what models can we see for this kind of development, and how are we going to incorporate that in a way that's right for Riverside?
All right. Yeah, so I'll start off, and then I'm going to ask Rob if he can talk about sort of the best practices when it comes to planning for new development, and particularly in terms of kind of design and how that can help to some extent with what you're getting at in terms of identity and place. But I just overall, Riverside is unique in the region, in that it is one of the older cities in the region that is best served by both a pretty compact street network, which is important for, when we look at things from a planning perspective, it's important for mobility and accessibility. We have the only high quality transit area in Riverside County, which kind of goes back to a previous question about why Riverside's arena numbers in particular were what they were. But we have that Magnolia Avenue, Market Street, University Avenue corridor that's served by multiple RTA lines plus an express RTA rapid service, and then we have 3.5, depending on how you count it, Metrolink stations in the city. We are, again, unique in the region in being positioned to have successful development of a higher intensity, a little bit more urban than you might see elsewhere in Riverside County or the inland region in particular. Rob, can you talk a little bit about how the planning process and how our development regulations can help with Sergio's question?
Sure, you bet. Yeah, I think that it's really important when we look at development, it's not just any kind of development. And that's exactly what the purpose of development standards are, and of having a zoning code that encourages the kinds of places where people want to live, work, and play. So that is definitely something that we're looking at. I also like to come back to one of the things that you mentioned a second ago about how much land is available, and that the land is really diminished in terms of the capacity. That's true in Riverside and everywhere in Southern California. So it's really important that we're not only looking at vacant land, because there's very little of that, but mostly looking at underutilized land. This is older buildings or underutilized properties that would have more value if they redeveloped as housing than their current use, which in some cases are just vacant buildings. So we need to look at both the land side of things and encourage development and redevelopment of areas that are not productive, but also to do that in a way that is really make places where people want to be.
Thank you. Okay, next we have a comment or question from Keith. So Keith, we'll invite you to unmute and you can have the floor.
Okay. Am I live?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, can you see me? Oh, there we go. I cannot start your video because the host has stopped it. I've been blocked.
Ariano, are we able
It's okay. My voice is good enough, Matt.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
You're welcome. Okay, and I've been typing as we went along the way here, and 4 plus decades in major home development, Riverside homer, 60 years old, 53-year resident, and I've pimped Riverside my entire life, try to get more building. We built, with both Covington Homes and D.R. Horton, a few projects throughout the city. Love to have done more. Done multiple multifamily projects and multiple projects with the affordable index. And the problem is when you're forced to put someone in that bracket, there is such a small bottleneck of getting a private bank to give a loan to someone that makes so little money, but yet has such crystalline credit, they're good for that loan. And that's really what it amounts to. And you can do all the magic, but unless someone pays for something to make it to equal the playing field, it's all about everyone's got to make their minimal amount of money. And I will cut out here because you've seen all my posts. So we can talk about this till ad nauseum, but until that one element is leveled, you can entice all developers in the world. You can mandate everything on earth. But unless it gets someone to want to come, they're not going to. Out. See you guys.
Okay, thanks very much for your comment, Keith. Yeah, I don't know if Jeff McLaughlin is still on the line and has a response to that. If not, that's okay. But looks like we do have Jeff here.
I am. It's a fairly broad question. I'll answer Keith's question just in the terms of variety of the things that the city is doing, the types of projects that we're doing. We're involved in traditional multifamily housing projects, and a lot of them. We're doing tiny home projects. We're looking at developing problem infill sites. We're doing small homes and ADUs and junior ADUs. We're looking at homeless to permanently housed projects right now to address the city's housing, homeless and housing problem there. We try to make, we do a variety of projects. We try to make housing available from everybody at 30% of the area median income, which is the shorthand for the federal poverty level, all the way up to 80% of the county median income. So families of four that earned, I think, just under $60,000 a year. Home ownership, rental, we try to meet needs all over the map. It is true that the numbers, because of the state's historic lack of housing development, kind of run against us. But we're at it, and we're trying to build housing that's affordable to a variety of folks in order to make the city a more livable environment.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Okay, next we will hear from Maribel. So Maribel, you'll be invited to unmute yourself.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, everybody. Maribel Nunez, Riverside Ward 1, and I'm also do a lot of advocacy work in regards to affordable housing, a part of Inland Equity Partnership and Inland Equity Community Land Trust. And thank you to be able to do these public comments. Thank you for having these follow-up meetings. We attended the first housing element workshop. Here we are in the second one, and look forward to follow up with city staff and the consultant of housing element. And yeah, I think for us, I am a Riversider, been living here for since 2012. And I know because somebody asked the question, where are we going to find these folks, right, for the affordable housing? Where are they coming from? They're here from Riverside. I know a lot of people, Generation X, millennials, that that have graduated from school, went to school here, and they're just renters, or they're living with their families, and there's no pathway for us and for them to be able to own home, just be renters. And some of us, we went to grad school, right? So it's not that we didn't get no GI Bill or any other way of building community wealth. It's previous generations were actually poor in the previous generation. And so I really want to let folks know that the people are from here that we're asking for affordable housing. And so, yeah, we know that 7,906 out of the 18,000 is not enough for the affordable housing. I think we need to increase that number. I am in support of the blended scenarios. I put in the survey, disperse and focus, variety locations. Definitely the way we're going to make sure that and my hope is that when we talk about affordable housing, we're not just talking about renting. We're talking about condos, community land trust, finding creative ways, right? Because we're going to need to be very creative that would motivate heightened projects with different multiple levels, higher density, mixed use, being flexible about ADU setbacks for backyards of homeowners to rent and stuff. There's a lot of vacant buildings, a lot of vacant homes. So let's be creative and appreciate this opportunity. And I really want to highlight, the special needs. We're going to be on the lookout for elders, low income. So yeah, we're going to be here and continue looking forward with this conversation. And thank you so much for letting me speak. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Maribel, for that comment. Okay, we don't have any hands currently, unless someone wants to throw one up. We only have a few more minutes. So unless I see any more hands raised, we can go back to the Q&A from earlier Q&A questions that we didn't get to, see how many of those we can get through, wanting to be respectful, of course, of folks' time. You've all taken time out of your evening that you could be spending with your families to talk to us, and we really, really appreciate that. So we'll just go for a couple more minutes here. And let me see what we have. If I miss a hand, someone please feel free to shout at me. But let's see. We have a question from Tom. What environmental impacts are you measuring? And in light of COVID, how does environmental justice policy address high density projects? So for the first part of that question, I want to ask Deborah if she can talk to us about what we'll be assessing from the environmental side of things.
Absolutely. So CEQA requires a number of environmental impacts to be evaluated, and every CEQA document has really roughly the same set of environmental impacts, including air quality and greenhouse gases, transportation, noise and vibration, biological resources, land use and planning. So there's a list of these, including wildfire, that are really key to the analysis. And it's really important for us to make sure that we evaluate the project as a whole and the individual components of the project in light of all of those individual environmental resource areas. So that way we cover what potential impacts there could be. And I think the second part of it was related to, in light of COVID, how does environmental justice policies address high density projects? So as a part of this overall program, we're developing policies for environmental justice that are specific to the housing element as well as the public safety element. So each of those two elements will have their own environmental justice policies, and we'll be looking at the different types of housing types, including high density projects, and we'll be developing likely a set of EJ policies that are specific to that. And COVID is obviously something we'll need to take a look at, and of course, we're hoping that, by next year, COVID will be something back in our history, won't be something that we're going to continue to deal with, but we will look at pandemics and probably develop specific environmental justice policies to pandemics and to these types of situations. So that way we can get ahead of those situations. We can be proactive in those types of situations and develop policies that we can implement that can help reduce the impacts specific to environmental justice policies, really populations, so those that are minority and low income. So we'll be taking a look at all of those things as a part of an environmental impact report, and we'll also be developing environmental justice policies specific to that.
Great, thank you very much, Deborah. Okay, last call for hands for comments, questions, suggestions, concerns, jokes. Anyone wants to add anything? We'll see here if we get any takers on that. If not, I'm going to give my closing spiel while we got one. All right. Oh no, it went away. No, it's still there. Okay, Jeffrey, you have the floor.
I just you said I could tell a joke, so I was going to tell a joke. I don't know if you really want to hear it though. So I'm just gonna pass. I don't want to.
Okay.
because, you know, a few people here I know, and they'll get mad at me if I tell this joke.
Okay. We'll make sure to watch your Comedy Central special. Jason, last comment before we close.
Hi there. I guess I'm unmuted now. The question I have is, would the city of Riverside consider annexation as part of its strategy to meet its numbers?
Okay, thanks for that. Really quickly, the annexation is not necessarily high on our list of things that we're going to be looking at doing, particularly because annexation, you know, when you expand, you know, areas of primary responsibility, there's additional cost that comes with that. Of course, the city has kind of paused annexations in the last decade or so, except for very, you know, circumstances that are kind of few and far between. Let's see. Okay, we are over time now, so I apologize that we won't be able to take any more comments or hands here. I want to thank you guys again, everyone who participated, everyone who joined us tonight. I know the audience tends to fall off a little bit as time goes on. We still got 75 people participating in this call, which is awesome. Everyone has been awesome. Thank you so much for being here. So please stay in touch. Please remember to sign up on the website for email updates. For announcements of our next meeting, we'll continue to send out notifications through all the channels that we already have. If you want to meet with me, please email me. I will be happy to talk to you. My email address is right here on the screen. And, you know, as necessary, I can pull in other members on the project team too. This has been a great conversation, really good meeting, really good feedback. I apologize that we didn't get to all of the questions, but thank you everyone for your contributions, and stay safe and have a wonderful night. Thank you.